Hi everyone, I'm Carlos Carnicero Urabayen, and I want to welcome you to another Future is Blue video talk, a Funcas Europe project produced by Agenda Pública. So today I'm joined by Iain Begg, Professorial Research Fellow at LSE and Funcas Europe. And we're here to talk, of course, about Brexit. And Professor, thanks for joining. And the first thing I want to ask you is about the chances for having a deal on a new trade relationship between the EU and the UK. This is very challenging because the pandemic that has pretty much transformed everything has not stopped the clock, and the clock is ticking. And this is very challenging. So what is your view on the chances of having a new trade relationship in time?
Let me give you two opposed answers. The first answer is that it's in both sides' interests to arrive at a deal as quickly as possible. And the obstacles to achieving that deal are still relatively limited. It's about fishing and it's about the internal market. On the pure trade side, I don't think there's much disagreement. That said, the positions being taken politically particularly by the British side, are not helpful. And the chances of things going wrong more by accident than by lack of will to resolve it are growing because of the tactics adopted by the Johnson government. And if that happens, then it's going to be damaging to both sides.
So you're implying that it is real that we may see a scenario where there's no deal before the end of the year. Therefore, in January, the UK and the EU are not going to have like a legal base to trade between one another. You've done calculations in the past, and you've written about that, and we've featured those articles extensively about the costs of no deal. But I wonder what's the impact of the pandemic, because it is disrupting so much our economies. So what's the impact of the pandemic in those calculations? How worse are those numbers now, considering all that's happening?
Well, the pandemic's effects are still quite unpredictable because we don't know if a second wave is going to lead to new lockdown, new loss of GDP, or whether it will be a very temporary second phase in which vaccines come to the rescue. So anything you say about forecasting the effects of the pandemic is not so much a forecast as a scenario, a speculation. It's more clear that Brexit will have a degree of damage depending on the extent of the separation between the UK and the rest of the EU. A close relationship gives the best effects on GDP. A very distant relationship is more damaging because it means loss of a very important market for the UK. Half its trade goes to the EU, but also quite a significant market for the EU side, especially for the countries that are closest to the UK geographically. That is above all Ireland, but it also affects France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and to a lesser extent Spain. The problem we have now is that negotiations are stuck not on trade, but on two quite different issues. One is fishing. In a way, it's ridiculous because fishing is such a small share of economic activity in Spain, in France, in the UK, or in Denmark, which are the countries most affected. And the problem there is that it's one about distributing something which is very limited, the catch in British territorial waters. If there is no deal, it will be damaging to the fishing industry in other countries. But it may damage the fishing industry in the UK because it will lose its privileged access to European markets. I know if you go to a restaurant in Madrid, you quite often will be eating British fish. And if that's stopped, it's damaging to both sides. I don't know if the lobsters or the squid that come from British waters are any better than from Spanish waters, but they can make a difference. And the second big issue is state aids. State aids, the problem is that the UK insists on having its independence on deciding which state aids to adopt. If it wants to subsidise a new technology industry, it should be free to do so. That's the British position. But the European position is that if there is a state aids regime in the UK which gives advantage to British producers, then that is damaging to EU producers. Now, the irony in all of this is that Britain over the years has had much less resort to state aids than some of the other countries in the European Union, particularly Germany, where the state aid expenditure has been 3 or 4 times as high as in the UK. But the concern is not to introduce something that becomes a future barrier to trade or a future source of advantage for the UK producers. These two issues can be resolved in 10 minutes if the political will is there to do it. Because, to take the example of fishing, somebody has to decide whose fishing industry is going to lose and whose is going to win. If it's the fishing industry in La Coruña or in Denmark that's going to lose, a difficult decision has to be taken, and we know that the fishing, mainly fishing men in those areas, will lose. That's a tough political decision, but somebody has to take it at some point.
I understand the reasoning on the fishing aspect. So it's about deciding who loses or who loses more. What about the state rules situation? Is there room for compromise? Because what is your view on that?
Well, there is potentially, because there can be some sort of protocol about saying to the UK, yes, we understand you want freedom to do things your way, because that, after all, was the underlying purpose of Brexit, taking back control. You remember that famous expression?
I do.
But the UK can give undertakings to say, we will not use this to discriminate so much that it becomes a competitive issue. There is room for compromise there. They just need to find the formula that makes it work. And here I think the necessity is for the significant political leaders inside the EU, Macron, Merkel, also Pedro Sanchez, to come to a view and say, this is the way we need to resolve it.
I'm getting optimist after learning from you that this can be solved in 10 minutes if there is the political will there in the right meeting room in the right moment. But I need to ask you about the latest news that we heard from the UK government, saying that it was ready to not to comply with the withdrawal agreement or some parts of the withdrawal agreement. And we've heard a minister saying, yes, this would mean we would be acting against the rule of law partially. So how bad is that scenario? How bad, what would be the implications of having a country like the UK not saying openly, we're ready not to comply with international treaty?
Well, it's not unprecedented. I read today something saying even the Germans have done it in the past in relation to monetary commitments. But in this context, I regard it as a rather risky move by the British side. I understand the motivation, which is that they're concerned particularly about Northern Ireland. And the ways in which the protocol will be broken are principally about Northern Ireland. And that is because the Northern Ireland decision inside the withdrawal agreement is a compromise on something on which it's not really possible to compromise, which is in Northern Ireland, you have the obligation to respect the no borders on the island of Ireland. Once Britain, or once the UK, I should be strict here, leaves the European Union, Northern Ireland becomes a frontier with the European Union. So if there's a different trade regime or any other kind of regime, necessarily you need to have some kind of controls on this. The decision in the withdrawal agreement was to have those controls effectively between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, the two islands. And the result of that is that Northern Ireland then becomes a special case, which is not one that some of the people in Northern Ireland are happy with. They don't want a barrier between them and the and Great Britain. There is no easy solution to this because it's an impossibility triangle. No border in Ireland, no border between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and leaving the customs union. You cannot have all three.
Yeah. Well, but the priority
this is the core of the problem, which this new proposal coming from the government is supposed to resolve. But I think it's a foolish one, because what they're saying is that we rushed the deal in October. Therefore, we want to unpick this element of Northern Ireland, even though we signed up to it. Not an easy solution.
Not an easy solution. Yeah, Professor, it's not easy to solve. It's so tricky, the issue of the border and the UK leaving and having taken back control, but having an open border, but willing to have independence in terms of trade and so on. But I think this is very sensitive because this is about respecting a peace agreement in a very in a
Yes.
territory that used to be very violent in the past. So I think the attention should be focused on really. I don't know if political leaders are aware of the fact of how sensitive that agreement in the end of the 90s was, and whether how risky it is to put it at risk to pursue a certain political agenda. I don't know. What's your view on that?
Well, it's certainly sensitive, and Spain, as a country which has endured all these years of Basque terrorism, knows exactly what the problem is if it starts to resurface. But to come back to the decision by Boris Johnson to try to renege on parts of the withdrawal agreement, I think the risks to him are, yes, there'll be a European backlash to it, but it also sends a signal to the rest of the world, which is not very good for Britain, particularly when it wants to negotiate trade deals with other parts of the world. Already, Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of Congress, has said that House of Representatives in Congress has said that there is no way Congress would approve a deal with the UK if there's a possibility of the UK reneging on it after it's been settled. So the damage that's being done by this proposal could well outweigh the potential benefits in terms of negotiating or simplifying things in Northern Ireland. And it would not surprise me if the Johnson government later this month turned around and said, no, we abandon this idea because it's obviously causing too much damage. Now, Boris is fortunate in one respect because he has a record in recent weeks of what we call U-turns, 180-degree turns in his politics. So he's at least established the principle that he can change his mind.
All right. Well,
that's a rather cynical remark.
Thank you, Professor. I think if any of the negotiators in both teams are listening to us, I hope you took note of what Professor Iain Begg said about 10 minutes and having the right political will and solving the situation, because otherwise it's going to be so devastating for so many businesses and people around the UK and the EU. So anyway, I want to thank you, and let's be in touch, because I think the next weeks and months are going to be very interesting to follow what's happening. So I'll be glad to invite you again to share your views.
Thank you, Carlos, and as I say, I hope somebody's listening.